Today, we're going deep inside one of the most legendary warships in history, HMS Victory. But we're not just taking a tour of an old ship. Oh no, we are going to dissect it, piece by piece, to understand it as a complex, powerful, and absolutely lethal war machine that basically defined an entire age of fighting on the sea. All right, let's set the scene. The year is 1805. On land, there is one name that strikes fear into the hearts of kingdoms: Napoleon Bonaparte. He is, for all intents and purposes, the master of Europe. After his tactical masterpiece at the Battle of Austerlitz, his armies look completely unbeatable.
But there's a catch. One stubborn island nation holds out, protected by the English Channel. See, Napoleon can march his armies across entire countries, but he can't walk on water. And guarding that water are Britain's wooden walls, the ships of the Royal Navy. They are the shield and the sword that keeps the most powerful man in the world at bay.
So what made these wooden walls so incredibly tough to break down? Well, it all comes down to the raw strategic power of the Royal Navy. For Britain, this fleet wasn't just an army. It was its lifeline. It was the key to survival and, as it turned out, the key to Napoleon's ultimate defeat.
And the sheer scale of this force, it's just staggering. At the peak of the Napoleonic Wars, the Royal Navy had something like 140 ships of the line. Now these were the heavyweights, the absolute battleships of their day. Massive floating fortresses just bristling with cannons.
And right at the very heart of all that power, the ultimate symbol of Britain's naval dominance, was a ship named HMS Victory. She was a first-rate ship of the line, which means she was in the top tier, one of the biggest, baddest warships on the entire planet.
Okay, so what exactly made this ship such a terrifying floating fortress? Let's pop the hood, shall we? We're going to break down the anatomy of this incredible piece of 18th century engineering.
So let's just look at the raw specs. Victory hauled 104 cannons across 3 massive gun decks. She needed a crew of about 820 men to operate. That's like a small village. She was 57 meters long, but for all that bulk, she could still hit a top speed of 10 knots, which is surprisingly quick. This wasn't just a ship. It was a city designed from the keel up for war.
And the resources needed to build this beast, they were just immense. To construct her hull alone, it took the wood of around 6,000 trees, most of them huge, mature British oaks. I mean, you're literally looking at a moving forest that's been turned into a weapon.
Now, the ship's engine was pure wind power, and its nervous system was all the rigging. The easiest way to think about this is to break it into 2 parts. You had the standing rigging, which was like the ship's skeleton, all the thick, tarred ropes that held the massive masts in place. Then you had the running rigging, which was like the ship's muscles, all the ropes the crew were constantly pulling and hauling on to control the sails.
And the scale of this whole system is it's mind-boggling. All told, the rigging on Victory was made up of 41 kilometers of rope and 786 different pulleys. If you laid all that rope out end to end, it would stretch for almost the entire length of a marathon. Insane!
But of course, all this incredible construction, all this wood, all this rope, it all served one primary purpose: to turn the ship into the ultimate engine of war. So let's talk about how this machine actually fought.
So just how much firepower are we really talking about here? Well, this quote pretty much says it all. A single broadside from HMS Victory, that's firing all the guns on just one side of the ship at once, unleashed more weight in iron cannonballs than all the cannons Wellington had at the entire Battle of Waterloo. Let that sink in. It was absolutely devastating. And it wasn't just about raw power. There were 2 very different philosophies on how to best use it. British gun crews were drilled to fire low and fast, aiming for the enemy's hull. The goal was to smash their cannons and, brutally, to kill and injure their crew. The French, on the other hand, usually aimed high for the rigging and masts. Their goal was to shred the sails and tangle the ropes to basically paralyze the ship. And to get those shots off required a brutal, well-oiled, and incredibly fast dance. In the chaos of battle, a really good gun crew could do this entire sequence, sponging out the hot barrel, loading the powder in the cannonball, heaving the massive gun forward, priming it, aiming, and firing in about 90 seconds. It was a terrifying, exhausting, and deadly ballet of violence.
But look, the wood, the ropes, the iron cannons, all of it was completely useless without the single most important component of this whole machine: the human system, the people. That crew of 820 men was basically a miniature floating society.
And it was an incredibly diverse mix. You had a small corps of officers and Marines, a big group of highly skilled and ordinary sailors, and then a whole bunch of specialists, like the carpenter and the surgeon, and even young boys, some just starting out their lives at sea.
So where did all these guys come from? Well, that's a tale of two completely different realities. About half the crew were volunteers, men who actually chose a life in the Navy. But the other half? They were pressed into service by the notorious press gangs, who would basically roam port towns and kidnap any able-bodied man they could get their hands on.
Which, of course, brings up a massive question. When you've got a crew that's half volunteers and half guys who were forced to be there, all crammed into these incredibly tight quarters, how in the world do you maintain control and turn them into an effective fighting team?
The answer was a rigid system of routine and discipline. It was kind of a carrot-and-stick approach. The stick was the terrifying threat of being flogged with the cat-o'-nine-tails for even minor mistakes. The carrot was the daily ration of grog, watered-down rum. Life was lived in hammocks hung just half a meter apart, right next to the cannons, and the day was ruled by a relentless schedule of work that left very little time to even think about causing trouble.
So, when we put all of that together, the amazing technology, the incredible firepower, and that all-important human element, we can finally start to see what a ship's true strength really was.
And this really gets to the heart of it all. As amazing as ships like Victory were, Britain's real secret weapon was its people. You see, the Royal Navy's strategy involved blockading French ports for years on end. This meant their sailors were constantly at sea, facing harsh weather, drilling their gunnery, and honing their skills. They were more experienced, more disciplined, and more battle-hardened than their French counterparts. They could simply sail their ships better and fire their guns faster. That was the edge.
After her long and famous career, HMS Victory was saved from being scrapped, and today she rests in a dry dock in Portsmouth, England. She's actually the oldest naval ship in the world that's still in commission, serving as a living museum, a powerful, tangible link to this incredible age of sail.
So, the story of HMS Victory leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was 200 years ago, right? What is the true source of power? Is it having the best, most advanced technology, or is it having the most skilled, trained, and determined people who actually know how to use it?